Now we have Mr. Ewing to continue his Snellville sound bites.
Thank you, Mayor, Council, for having me once again to continue our series on the sound bites of Snellville history. The last time we covered the 1880s, and I left you with 4 points to remember. Young Snell and Sawyer made quite a splash when they opened a business here in Snellville, but then they split. The community got its name, Snellville, and we got a post office, Snellville. Their store was a magnet. It was the hub around which other businesses, churches, schools, doctors, cotton gins, sawmills, grist mills, and blacksmiths located. It appears the 1880s were a boon time for Snellville. So I'm going to take you now from 1890 to 1900 to turn of the century. Going pretty fast. Take good notes. Don't want you to fail the test. There were two doctors in the community by the late 1880s, a Dr. McCarty and a Dr. Mahaffey. Nothing is known about McCarty, but Dr. Mahaffey is known to be a farmer, a teacher, a merchant, and a doctor. I wish some of our doctors would get second jobs nowadays so it wouldn't cost so much. Dr. Mahaffey held an auction to reduce his store stock in 1890. Shortly after, in 1891, he abandons his family and absconds with his clerk, lady clerk, who is also his wife's cousin. They are arrested in Mississippi and returned to the Snellville community. I wonder what the nightly news would make of that today. Nothing more has been found about the matter or the doctor. While it was reported that he taught schools some, he was replaced by Professor Leval, presumably in the same facility that Professor Oscar Brown built that I told you about in an earlier presentation. By this time, it is being referred to as the Academy. Also, the Baptist Church, and you remember the picture I showed you of the Baptist Church, the old wooden building? It's got lights. It said, we have given funds to the housekeeper to buy a lamp. Can you imagine a building this size, no white paint on the inside, all wood, and you got a lamp? Now, I meant to light that up, but I figured I was going to have to call the fire department, times have changed, and have them standing by with a fire extinguisher to light that up. And then I was going to give it to Mayor Couch and let her conduct the meetings tonight with that lamp. But since I didn't get a chance to talk to her about it, I thought better of it because I do want to come back once again. Imagine if you didn't have one lamp, you had 12 lamps in a building of this size. And compare that to the lights we got. Had a reflector of it. Set on the side of the wall like that is, and that reflector would throw out a little bit of the light. And you could almost see from the wall to the edge of that, and all the people in the middle were still in the dark. Now, in a home, there would probably be two of those in the sitting room, wherever that might be, one on each end of the mantel. If someone was writing a letter or children were doing studying, they had another lamp that they might let you light or take one of those to sit on a table, maybe the same table that you had your meal at, to do your studying by or write the letter by. Also, there was normally one lamp on the table that the family had the meal at. And I didn't say dining room because many of the farm homes have such thing as a dining room. Times have changed. Mr. Sawyer's store in 1894. It was reported by the county newspaper, the Snellville Community News, in August and October of 1894 that Mr. Sawyer's new granite store was completed. Now, we saw that picture many times, and we wondered when it took place. It finished in the fall of 1894. And that's basically what it looked like when it was finished. That's Mr. Sawyer on my right, and a gentleman that works for him, Mr. Langley, that is seated. Sometime after that, he modified the store, and this looks more like what you would see now. You see the top of it's changed. The windows and everything else is the same. There's a well in front of it. I never knew there were a well in front of it. We only obtained this picture very recently. It's a very lousy picture, and I tried to clean it up as best I could. Now, the newspaper reported that Mr. Sawyer was going to entertain the elite on the second floor. I don't know what that meant, but you can figure it out for yourselves. It was later reported that he rolled the old wooden building of the Sawyer-Snell area up the road to a point near his residence. Now that conflicts with the persistent story that Mr. Sawyer built his rock building around the old wooden building and tore it down piece by piece and moved it up to his house and put it back together again. I don't know which is right, but I don't think the newspaper would have reported it if he hadn't rolled that building up the road in front of everybody. Mr. Sawyer's future looks bright. He is now 37 years old. Mr. Joseph Thomas Snell and his store. His sister is returning to clerk in his store. I believe it's a sister that had moved to Wisconsin. Mr. Snell apparently got his store built first, although it's not as elaborate as Mr. Sawyer's. One can sense now the competition between the two old friends, or young friends. And there's the first ad put out by Mr. Snell separately. I showed you an ad earlier that was Sawyer and Snell. Now this is Mr. Snell's first ad after he opened his separate store. About 35 years later, that's what the front of that same store looked like. Notice the gravity field pump, gas pumps. All those young ladies in front of there are school teachers from the local consolidated school. That picture was taken somewhere about 1930, 31, right in that time frame. Mr. Sawyer is now involved in farming. He's also purchased a blacksmith shop, although he's going to have some competition because there's a new fellow in town that's built a brand new blacksmith shop. The new Cates District Courthouse is completed. Now we have seen this picture several times, but now we know when it was completed. In 1895, the outside was completed, and I believe they said it would take about another year to finish the inside. Mr. Snell had a big hand in building that building. In fact, the story goes that he donated the materials for that Cates District Courthouse. Mr. Snell has built himself a granite barn. I don't have a picture of that, but Mr. Sawyer got busy and built himself a barn right away. But Mr. Snell finished his first. Now, that's a pretty elaborate barn for this community in that time. And I will tell you that that barn, it was set right directly in front of his house. It's about where the big bank sits there on, that's on 124. It's backed up to North Road. That barn sat about, I can't tell exactly anymore the way it's all been regraded and changed, but that's approximately where that barn was sitting. Now, that barn had three purposes. You don't see the ground floor, which is level. The pasture is out back and goes across where 124 is. When they built 124, they built a, I don't know what to call it, a place the cattle could walk through. Under that 124, they graded, so the cattle for Mr. Sawyer's son, who was living there at the time, could continue to get to their pasture and the water down at the creek branch on the lower side. Now the cattle was down on the lower side. The main level and the upstairs was going to be storage for stock for his store. Pretty wise fellow. Now you stand where that store is at, and if you look towards where that barn is, and you look towards his store, you could see very easily the front of his store from that barn. So he walked to work every day, and if he wanted to haul some material back and forth, it wasn't a big deal. Now there's a new sawmill in town owned by Mr. Henderson and a Mr. Britt. There's a new cotton gin that has also been established by Mr. Henderson. This would be the second gin, but I think the old one has already departed for some reason. Mr. Snell has built himself a large fish pond. Sadly, he's also constructed a family burial ground. It was located up the hill across from his home. His home was up on the left as you go out 78, just out there beyond where the car lot's at. So the burial ground would have been up the hill on that, referred to as a mountain. It's really a hill. It was Brownlee Mountain first, and then when Snell bought part of the property, everybody started calling it Snell Mountain. On February 28th, 1896, Mr. Snell died from complications following surgery by a doctor in Atlanta. He was only 39 years old. Folklore will tell you that he was operated on the kitchen table by two doctors, and he bled to death. Folklore will tell you he was operated by one of those doctors for appendicitis, and the appendix burst, and he got inflammation and died. Folklore will tell you a half a dozen other stories, none of which is true. I'm going to share just a couple of paragraphs in the obit. The obit is 3 pages. It's 3 paragraphs long. Death of J.T. Snell. Died in Atlanta last Friday from the effect of a surgical operation by Dr. Holmes. Several years ago, an abscess formed on his liver, which, by the skill of Dr. Westmoreland, was removed and his life was saved, even when his physicians regarded it as a very delicate and dangerous operation. You got to just stop and think a minute. You're talking about the middle 1890s. A month or two ago, an abscess formed on his bowels, and a week ago he went to Atlanta to have it removed. Hoping for the best, yet fearing for the worst, he made all his arrangements and let the result be what it would, and death came. He was buried on the mountain above his home. I talked to his great-granddaughter, who's still living out in Carrollton, I believe it is, Cartersville or Carrollton. She's in her 90s now. Health's not good. He had one daughter who had one son who had one daughter. So there's not a lot of descendants from that Snell. This Snell is not descended from him. I'll tell you about him another night. He was later disinterred from the mountain and moved to Lithonia. His daughter married a man from Lithonia, Mr. Johnson, and she later moved her mother down there when she got older, and her grandmother, to see after them. And sometime along that time, and I'm going to find out when, I don't know now just when, he was disinterred and moved to Lithonia. She tells me that his marker at his grave up on the mountain was a obelisk, tall, similar to the tall ones out here, and it was of pink marble. And when they moved it, they were coming down the hill or mountain. And in those days, you hauled stuff by a box wagon, and they had this heavy piece of monument on this wagon. And if you've ever driven a pair of mules or horses and a wagon downhill loaded, you're out of control. And they got out of control. And the monument rolled off the wagon and busted. So it didn't get to Lithonia. This is Mr. Snell's grave in Lithonia. And his wife and his daughters are just to the right of that. Now, his great-granddaughter also tells me that her father, when they moved him down there, and when his mother was buried, they had nice, big, large, elaborate monuments, as people who have done well would have. But her father, for some reason she doesn't know, had them all taken down, and they've all got the same monument, just like that. Well, Mr. Mercer George purchased a Snell store and stock, and it was initially run by Mr. Osmer, who stayed around Snellville for quite a while. Now we're getting into around 1897, and we got a couple of factories in town. Cottage manufacturers, if you will. Connor and Barnett began manufacturing buggies and fertilizer distributors. Mr. Boozer opened a hat factory. And in researching in the paper, you see a lot of reference to that. Apparently it was a pretty popular operation. Mr. Sawyer ran an ad for his store in the county paper, and I wonder what kind of feelings he had having left England with this young man as his friend, starting a business, and then it's broke up, split, and now he's gone. By 1899, we've got telephones. Dr. Kofer and Mr. Sawyer were some of the first citizens to have a telephone. Of course, it was a party line, and it was the old wall-hanging wooden Mabel, get me so-and-so telephone. That lasted a while and went busted, went away. A little bit about the census of 1900 now. From 1840 to 1900, the households have increased 75%. The population has increased only 27%. That's 60 years. The average family size in 1840 was 7.6. The average family size in 1890 was 5.5. Snellville at the crossroads in 1900 now has 3 or more merchants, a sawmill, a grist mill, a cotton gin, 2 cottage factories, a doctor, a school, 2 churches, a post office, telephones. It is obviously a vibrant, growing community by the standards of that time. Turn of the century, 1900. 5 points to remember. Sawyer and Snell both built new granite buildings during this 10-year period. Other businesses opened, including 2 factories. Dr. Kofer, the new doctor in town, was well established. He stayed here for several years. The community received its first telephones. Mr. Snell, late of London, England, prominent pioneer merchant, died. Next week, the next session, I'm going to cover the life of Mr. Joseph Thomas Snell. Thank you very much. Any questions?
Any questions for Mr. Ewing? Thank you, Mr. Ewing. I believe Ms. Hetty